The observation deck hummed with the low thrum of recycled air as Dane Martinez ran diagnostics on the safehouse's security grid. 3 months aboard the Obsidian Wraith had taught him one crucial rule: stay invisible. The mercenary captain didn't tolerate distractions, and he was just a contracted systems analyst, expendable. He cycled through camera feeds with practiced efficiency, checking blind spots and sensor arrays. The crew had scattered after the botched extraction on Kepler 442b. Captain Vex had returned alone, her team either dead or compromised. Dane had watched the docking bay feed earlier. She'd barely made it back, her armor cracked and smoking. His fingers paused over the console when movement flickered on monitor 7. The captain's private quarters. The feed should have been disabled per her standing orders, but a system glitch during the emergency landing had overridden the privacy protocols. He should close it. Report the malfunction. Look away. But he didn't. Captain Rhea Vex stood in the center of the room, her back to the camera. Even through the grainy feed, she commanded presence, 6 feet of corded muscle and lethal grace. Her species, the Kethran, were known across 7 systems as apex predators turned soldiers. Their females were particularly feared. She reached up and unclasped her chest plate. It fell to the floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the audio feed. Dane's throat went dry. This was wrong. This was a violation. But his hand remained frozen above the kill switch. The shoulder guards came next, revealing deep blue skin marked with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with her heartbeat. Then the arm bracers. Each piece of armor hit the floor like a judge's gavel, and with each removal, more of her became visible. Her back was a roadmap of violence. Scars crisscrossed the expanse of blue flesh, some raised in keloid, others faded to silver. Burns from plasma fire. Deep gouges from bladed weapons. A starburst pattern near her left shoulder blade that could only be shrapnel damage. She was magnificent. Terrifying. Heartbreakingly vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. Dane watched as she reached for the fasteners at her waist, and shame finally broke through his paralysis. He moved to disconnect the feed. She stopped. Completely still, her hands frozen mid-motion, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. Kethran had enhanced senses, he remembered distantly. They could detect electromagnetic fields, temperature changes, even the subtle alteration in air pressure from someone breathing too hard in an adjacent room. Could they sense the heat signature from an active monitoring system? "If you're going to watch," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the audio feed, "calm as still water before a storm, at least have the courage to come inside." The world tilted. She hadn't moved, hadn't turned around, but she knew. She'd known the entire time. Dane's heart hammered against his ribs as he stared at the monitor, watching the powerful line of her shoulders, the steady rise and fall of her breathing. The intercom crackled. Deck 7. Section C. "You have 2 minutes before I come find you instead." The walk from the observation deck to her quarters felt like death row. Dane's hands trembled as he palmed open each security door, his mind racing through scenarios, all of them ending badly. Kethran mercenaries had killed for less than unauthorized surveillance. He'd heard stories of Captain Vex herself tearing out a man's throat for simply touching her weapon without permission. The door to Section C stood before him, matte black and forbidding. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the metal, he could hear movement, the soft pad of bare feet, the rustle of fabric. "It's open." Her voice was closer than expected. He stepped inside and the door sealed behind him with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like a coffin closing. The quarters were sparse, military efficient. A weapons rack dominated one wall, various blades and firearms arranged with obsessive precision. A single bunk built for someone her size. A small ablution station. And in the center of it all, Captain Rhea Vex. She'd changed into a simple black tank top and tactical pants, her armor piled near the doorway. Without it, she seemed somehow more dangerous, like seeing a predator outside its cage. The bioluminescent patterns on her arms pulsed a steady blue, matching her heartbeat. Her eyes, pupilless and solid amber, fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. He started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. Save the apology. She moved across the room with fluid grace, retrieving something from a storage locker. When she turned back, she was holding a white medkit with the Galactic Coalition medical seal. She tossed it to him, and he caught it reflexively. You've seen the damage. Now help fix it. Dane stared at the kit, then at her. I don't understand. The wound on my back. Lower left side, approximately 15 centimeters from my spine. She walked to the bunk and sat, presenting her back to him. Projectile graze. The autodoc sealed the major bleeding, but there's debris lodged in the tissue. I can't reach it properly, and I don't trust the others not to use proximity to a vital organ as an opportunity. She wanted him to touch her? After he'd violated her privacy? The contradiction made his head spin. Why not kill me? The question escaped before he could stop it. Her shoulders shifted, almost a laugh. Still might. Depends on how steady your hands are. She glanced back at him over her shoulder, amber eyes unreadable. Well. He approached slowly, hyper-aware of the controlled power in her frame, the way her muscles shifted beneath that blue skin. Up close, he could see the finer details, the geometric patterns of bioluminescence that traced along her shoulders like circuitry, the subtle scales that gave her skin an iridescent quality. The wound was exactly where she'd described an angry gash sealed with synthetic tissue, but he could see the dark fragments embedded beneath. He opened the medkit with unsteady hands, extracting a pair of microforceps and a dermal regenerator. This will hurt, he warned. Everything hurts. Her voice held a weariness that had nothing to do with physical pain. At least this pain has a purpose. He began working, using the forceps to carefully extract the first fragment, a piece of shattered ceramic from body armor, probably belonging to whoever had shot her. She didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but he felt her muscles tense beneath his touch. You fought 20 soldiers today, he said quietly, focusing on his work to avoid thinking about the warm solidity of her under his fingers. The docking bay footage showed what was left of them. 23. A pause. The last 3 I killed with my bare hands when my ammunition ran out. He extracted another fragment, larger than the first. A bead of luminescent blue blood welled up, and he quickly applied coagulant. Why did you take the contract? Everyone knew it was a trap. The payment was substantial. Not worth your life. Perhaps not. She was quiet for a moment as he worked on a particularly deep piece of debris. But I have mouths to feed. A crew depending on me. And a reputation that says I don't refuse jobs, no matter how impossible they seem. There was something beneath her words, a brittleness, like ice over deep water. Her presence this close was overwhelming, the heat radiating from her body, the way her pupils dilated slightly as she studied his face. You're 28. Former Coalition Navy, discharged after questioning orders that would have resulted in civilian casualties. Excellent technical skills, mediocre combat training, and a psychological profile that flags you as having an inconvenient conscience. You read all that before hiring me? I read all that before deciding whether to kill you for watching me. A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched her lips. Your file says you're trustworthy. Loyal to a fault. The kind of person who'll carry guilt for things that aren't your responsibility. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed one hand against his chest. Her palm was warm through his shirt, and he could feel the slight texture of her scales. Your heart is racing. You're terrifying. Good. Fear keeps humans alive. But she didn't move her hand. What else am I? The question hung between them, loaded with something he couldn't name. He thought about what he'd seen on the monitor, not the warrior, but the woman removing armor piece by piece, revealing wounds and weariness. Tired, he said quietly. Lonely. Carrying weight that would break most people. Her bioluminescent patterns flared brighter, a cascade of light racing across her skin. He'd learned enough about Catherine physiology to know it indicated strong emotion, though whether anger or something else, he couldn't tell. Dangerous words, little human. Her voice had dropped lower, intimate. You're making me sound almost sympathetic. You asked what else you were. Not what you want people to think you are. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, her hand still pressed against his racing heart. Then she did something that shocked him more than anything else that night. She let her forehead rest against his shoulder, just for a breath, just for a heartbeat. The gesture was so unexpectedly vulnerable that he froze, afraid to move and shatter whatever fragile thing had formed between them. I'm so tired, Dane. The words were barely a whisper against his collarbone. I'm so tired of being the last one standing. Without thinking, he raised his hand and placed it carefully on her back, feeling the warmth of her, the steady rise and fall of her breathing. She didn't pull away. Instead, she seemed to sink into the contact, as if his touch was the only thing anchoring her to something real. They stayed like that, her kneeling before him, him holding her as gently as he'd hold something precious and breakable, until her patterns slowly dimmed to their normal pulse. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were clearer, more focused. You'll keep night watch rotation, she said, her command voice returning. But you'll do it from here. I need someone I can trust monitoring the systems while I sleep, and I apparently trust you now. She stood, offering him a hand up. And Dane? If you tell anyone about this conversation, I'll space you. He took her hand, let her pull him to his feet. Understood, Captain. Rhea. She corrected. When we're alone, it's Rhea. The next 2 weeks established a rhythm that felt both surreal and startlingly natural. Dane would arrive each evening at 2,200 hours, carrying his portable system console and whatever meal he'd managed to procure from the ship's limited galley. Rhea would be there, sometimes maintaining weapons, sometimes reviewing contracts, occasionally just sitting in the dim light with a weariness that made him ache. They didn't talk much at first. He'd set up his workstation in the corner, monitoring security feeds and running system diagnostics while she went about her evening routine. But gradually, conversation began to flow. Small things at first: observations about crew dynamics, speculation about upcoming contracts, the peculiar smell that had started emanating from the port engine. Tonight, she was cleaning her plasma rifle with methodical precision, each movement practiced and efficient. Dane watched from his console, noting the way her fingers moved across the weapon with something approaching tenderness. You never ask about the jobs, she said without looking up. Not my place to ask. But you're curious. She set down the cleaning rod and met his eyes. You wonder how I choose. What lines I won't cross. He couldn't deny it. Yes. I don't take contracts involving children. I don't take political assassinations, too messy, too many variables. I don't work for the Zenthari Collective because they traffic in sentient beings. She returned her attention to the rifle. Everything else is negotiable depending on the price. That's a broader moral spectrum than I expected. I'm a killer, Dane. Not a saint. But there was something defensive in her tone. I provide a service. Sometimes that service prevents larger conflicts. Sometimes it just shifts power from one terrible person to another. I stopped trying to judge it years ago. When did you start? He saved his work and turned to face her fully. Being a mercenary? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, 14 years ago. I was 23, freshly discharged from the Kethrin Defense Corps with commendations in trauma neither my government nor my family knew how to handle. Her hands still on the weapon. My bonded mate had been killed in the same engagement that won me those commendations. I came home to a world that celebrated me while I was hollow inside. I'm sorry. Don't be. Coven died doing what he loved, protecting others. It's what we'd both trained for. She set the rifle aside, her movements deliberate. But the grief. Kethrin bond deeply. Losing a mate is like losing a limb. You learn to function around the absence, but you never stop feeling the phantom pain. Dane had read about Kethrin bonding, a neurochemical and psychological connection that formed between committed partners, deeper than human marriage. Breaking it through death often left the survivor fundamentally altered. Is that why you don't? He gestured vaguely, unsure how to phrase it. Why I don't take lovers? She raised one eyebrow ridge. I do, occasionally. Physical release is necessary for maintaining combat effectiveness. But I don't bond. Can't bond. That part of me died with Coven. She stood, moving to the small viewport that showed the black of space. What about you? Your file mentioned a relationship that ended badly. You really did read everything. Answer the question. He joined her at the viewport, careful to maintain distance. Her name was Elena. We were together 3 years. She wanted stability, a home on Earth, regular hours, safety. I wanted to believe I could give her that. He smiled bitterly. Turns out I'm not built for normal life. The day-to-day of civilian existence felt like suffocating. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, feeling like I was forgetting something crucial, like there was a threat I should be monitoring. Combat fatigue. Common in discharged soldiers. She called it being broken. Said I needed to get over it and grow up. The old wounds still stung. She wasn't wrong. But I couldn't change, and she couldn't wait. So she left. Rhea turned to look at him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. She was wrong. You're not broken. You're just calibrated for a different kind of life. She reached out and tapped his chest, right over his heart. This thing that keeps you alert, that makes you vigilant? Out here, that's called survival instinct. That's called being a good soldier. The validation shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. He felt something a knot in his chest that he hadn't realized was there. Come here, she said suddenly, moving away from the viewport. I want to show you something. She led him to her weapons rack and pulled down a blade he'd never seen her use, a curved knife with a handle wrapped in worn leather and a blade that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Coven's knife, she said, holding it with reverence. Kethran tradition says a warrior's blade carries their spirit. When he died, this came back to me. She turned it, and he saw inscriptions along the blade in a script he didn't recognize. It says, until the stars fade. That was his promise to me. Why show me this? Because you asked earlier why I keep taking contracts. Why I keep fighting when I'm this tired. She looked at the blade, then at him. This is why. Because Coven believed we fought so others didn't have to.